This is the third part of a series of interviews of owners of the Wildflower Cafe, founded 1987 in Arcata, California. The Wildflower Cafe has always been a very kind place to the community, serving vegetarian cuisine in a fine manner, and everyone's always been welcomed very happily in the Wildflower Cafe to eat vegetarian cuisine in its finest. Even in the bathroom, this sign says, "Please seat yourself." With a sense of humor, the Wildflower Cafe has moved forward. So let's have a little interview with Darcey Quinn, the third owner of the Wildflower Cafe. Hi, this is Sean Powers with another interview about the Wildflower Cafe. And my whole series of interviews has been with the owners, previous owners of the Wildflower Cafe, which has been continually running vegetarian restaurants since 1987. And I first interviewed Melanie, who ran the restaurant for 14 years. She was the person that started it, called it the Wildflower Cafe. And then after that, I interviewed Connie, and Connie ran the place for 10 years. And the next person I'm interviewing is sitting here right in front of me, and with a beam of light shining down on her, and it's making her smile even greater. And I really enjoy these interviews because all these women have been a big part of my life as far as the Wildflower Cafe goes. And I've always had a crush on every single one of them. And Darcey was another one of those crushes. And I don't know why the crush happened, except maybe it was because they were like motherly figures to me, because they were the women that ran the place. And it wasn't always women that ran the place. Darcey actually had a partnership with her husband, Pat Quinn, and they ran it together. Now, Melanie ran it by herself, and as you saw in the first interview, and Connie had her partner at the time, Eric, but Eric, part of the deal was that Eric really didn't want to be part of the restaurant, but she convinced him to do it. And he did pretty good. I liked Eric a lot, but he wasn't a restaurant owner, or conveyor of good restaurant entrepreneurship, even though he tried his best. But Pat and Darcey did a really good job, and they bought it together. And that was the one thing about the Wildflower Cafe, that it was employee bought. Throughout all those years, it was always someone that worked there that wound up buying the restaurant and then continuing the Wildflower saga. And so, using my same format that I've done with everybody else, I have a series of questions. And my first question, they all start with WH. So my first question for Darcey is, who are you?
Well, I am Darcey Quinn, and I have lived in Arcata, California since 1998. I moved here with my best friend, Stacy, and completely fell in love with the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in Michigan, and when we were driving out west, we both talked about what we envisioned our lives would be, and our dream was to get a job at a vegetarian restaurant. And I kid you not, somehow the universe provided, and not only did I get a job at wildfloweR, but Stacy did as well. So it was meant to be, and our dreams came true. And I worked there for 8 years before we were so fortunate to be able to take it over, and owned the restaurant for 8 years. So it was a huge part of my life for over 15 years. And currently I'm raising my 2 beautiful children and working full time. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
So when you saw the Wildflower, you're like, there's our place that we're going to work at.
Yeah, and the funny thing was, because it was the only vegetarian restaurant in town, and that was both our dreams, we kind of made a pact that neither one of us were allowed to apply there because that wouldn't be fair. So we were like, okay, just don't turn in your resume there. And we both broke that promise and we both turned in our resume there. And the day that Connie, who was the owner at the time, called to set up our interviews, she must have been calling prospective employees one right after another. So we weren't home, and it was back when you had a answering machine, on a landline. And so Connie's first message, which is, I don't even know what our message was, probably something like, hey, we're not here, leave a message, you know. And she left a message for Stacy, and then the next voicemail that we heard was Connie again. And she was like, I feel like I just called here, but this message is for Darcey. And so we were so excited, and we were like, oh my gosh, okay, whoever gets the job, it's meant to be, and we'll be supportive. And we interviewed on the same day, and Connie, for some miraculous reason, needed 2 employees, and she told me when I showed up to my interview that I was the first person to interview that day with shoes on, and so that impressed her right off the bat. And she hired us both, and it was just a dream come true.
Okay, well, you have to have some inside information about the town of Arcata. The idea of coming to a job interview with no shoes on is about right about down the alley that we run in. Arcata is in Humboldt County, up near the Oregon border. Humboldt State University is there, and it's the last remnants of the hippie evolutionary pattern, in that a lot of people wound up living there, go back to the land, and they had children, and the children had children. And so there's like many generations of hippie, or as I call it, cool. And so for someone to come into a job interview not wearing shoes is pretty typical. And you are a gem for wearing shoes.
Yes.
And you were hired right off because you wore shoes.
Yep. Well, there's really good work ethic in Michigan, so I had a stellar resume, I had my shoes on, and I was presentable.
Right, you didn't smell.
And I was willing to work.
Yeah, did Stacy show up with her shoes too?
Yes, of course.
Man, I've always liked people from Michigan. People from Michigan are really cool. So people belong in Arcata if they're from Michigan. That's all I gotta say. I've never met anybody from Michigan that was not cool and had some kind of innovative ideas. In fact, I learned how to make wine from Darcey.
Yes, I remember.
And I've made wine for so many years after that. And I've taught so many other people how to make wine with a white bucket and some cheesecloth and some sugar and some
fruit. Any fruit you want.
Yeah, anything. You can even make lettuce wine if you want, Anyways, so that was the who you are.
Yes.
That's the WH of who. Now, my next question is what? And sometimes I'm not really prepared for these interviews and I don't really know what I'm going to ask, but my what question is like, what gave you the idea that you can actually run a restaurant?
Well, I didn't know, Sean, if I could run a restaurant, but I wanted to try. I went to HSU, which is our college. Now it's Cal Poly Humboldt.
Mm-hmm.
And I was getting a degree in elementary education, mm-hmm. which I was not truly passionate about. And my last year of school, I was finally in the classroom and working with the children, and it wasn't for me. And I thought, great, now I have a degree that I'm not going to use. And meanwhile, my partner, Pat, was graduating with a music degree. This is his bass.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, I love music, but what am I going to do with a music degree? So we were very close with Connie, the previous owner, and she had two beautiful twin daughters, and we would babysit for her time from time. We were really lived close proximity, virtually on the same street, so we were like neighbors at the time. And yeah, when she just kind of mentioned, it was like a thought of, maybe being ready, and not even a declaration that she was selling the restaurant, but just in conversation, honest, thought that maybe it would be time. And that was like this little seed that she planted in my brain. And I just thought, wow, what an opportunity. This would be my way to stay in Arcata, which I love, my chosen home. And I've worked there for 8 years, and I am a pretty smart person. At least I think I am. So that's why. That's how I thought that I could possibly do it. And then having Pat, who was willing and able, and just as passionate as I was, we were like, what the hell? Let's dive in head first and see if we can. So,
because Pat was working there also,
yeah,
as a cook.
Yeah. So,
was there any hesitation?
Oh yeah. And there wasn't a lot of support. I mean, we were 25, and Connie was really willing to, once we finally approached her with her idea, she was like super stoked. And I think that somewhere in her mind, she was hoping that we would be the ones to step forward and grab the baton. That's how I always think of it. All these owners just passing the baton to their employees. So she was, supportive and ready to help us carry a portion of the loan as much as possible. But here we are, 25-year-olds, on our last semester of college, totally broke. I had zero savings or anything, and went into a bank, a local bank, and talked about getting a business loan, and pretty much got laughed at. We had no equity, we had no assets, and so we just, got creative, and we wrote letters to all of our relatives and family and friends and anybody in our life, just asking for any amount of support, and basically personal loans that we were willing to pay back, and hopefully like 5 years. And even with that, there was little support. There were people like, are you crazy? Like, you're gonna buy a restaurant and you're 25 and you don't know what you're doing. But we were just determined. And so I started taking classes at the SBDC, which I think is the Small Business Development Center. And they were awesome, and they helped us write a business plan, and they had a whole library of resources, and I just started reading books and, really educating myself. And I learned how to draw up contracts and amortization schedules, and we got a little bit of support and then more support, and before I knew it, we'd pieced together like over 10 probably small loans from 10 different people. So I was managing all of that, and and then the AEDC, which is Arcata Economic Development Center, they were the final piece of the puzzle. So we had the money for the cost of the business, but we didn't have anything left. We needed some like working capital, basically. So they gave us a loan there, and just made it work.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what did it do to you?
I mean, it totally changed my life. Yeah, there's like, I wish I still had it. I had a newspaper article when Pat and I bought the restaurant that was in the Times Standard. And graduating college and the stress of that and the stress of trying to get everything ready to buy this business and then actually buying it, it was, I almost had a nervous breakdown. I mean, I think I was at that point just living off of espresso and too stressed out to eat, and I probably weighed 100 pounds, and it was intense. And so I just remember that first morning when it was officially ours, and it was Pat and I, and it was time to open the door, and I said to him, I don't know if I can do this. And he said, just go open the door. You can open the door. And so
Step one.
I opened that door, and it stayed open for us for 8 years. Yeah, and I think it really forced me to grow up pretty damn quick. It was a lot of responsibility. It was managing typically over 20 part-time employees at all times, serving our community, which is, just so humbling to be able to do that, and, maintaining quality and just maintaining sanity. And sometimes we're amazing and sometimes we're really stressful. So
yeah, that's part of my questions. Is it's not a WH question, but it does have WH in it, and it's how. And my question in the realm of how was, how did you process and deal with all that responsibility and pressure?
yeah, I mean, I always had the understanding that I was doing the best I could do, and my goal was to please everybody, but I always knew I can't please everybody. So it was like, I just tried to make sure that I felt good about what the restaurant was producing, and as long as I felt good about it, I just couldn't care what other people would think. And we had such a strong following and such a strong core, group of regulars that ate there literally every single day. And if anything, I would take their opinions or suggestions because they were my people and they were who I trusted. And so if they said something was off or a certain employee wasn't, awesome, I would hear them. But yeah, I just focused on the good. That's like what I do in life all the time. It's like I try to stay positive, and days would be hard and it was a lot of stress, but I always would just be grateful for like what I had and appreciate all the things that went right that day.
And that's a thread that ran through the consistency of the wildfloweR Cafe. It was a community-based restaurant. Melanie's statement was that when she grew up in the Bay Area and a lot of the vegetarian restaurants there, but she said some of them just made terrible food that was like bland and tasteless, and her goal was to make vegetarianism exciting. And so what did you do for the restaurant to make it exciting and change it?
Well, I mean, it's pretty classic, the wildfloweR. There's some recipes that I think are still there that are just delicious. And so we did some slow changes. We definitely kept things as it was because just buying it so young and having so many loans to pay back, we really needed to ensure that the community would support us. And so in my mind, I thought, well, this is a good thing here, so let's keep this good thing going. And then over time, we kind of got a little bit more creative and wanted to bring in some almost like pop-up ideas where we would like try to have different kinds of ethnic food here and
Yeah.
there. And so we were like, oh, let's maybe have an Ethiopian night, or
Yeah.
you know, like a pizza night. And then we also just slowly started adding in new recipes and adjusting some of the original ones, but always felt passionate about keeping it vegetarian.
Right.
And then, you know, vegetarian myself since I was 16. So there was never a thought of serving meat there, which oddly was one of the suggestions that was brought to us, you know, from some community members. So yeah, I think it's just such a special place, and the food has always been good, and we're so blessed to live in this area where we have like amazing local produce. So the quality and the freshness, always working with farmers and getting as much local stuff as possible, and you can't really go wrong. So even a simple dish with such fresh ingredients is going to be good.
Yeah, and didn't you start serving alcohol?
So Connie actually was the one who acquired the beer and wine license. So she started serving that, and then we I think kind of brought that to the next level. I think we started serving mimosas in the morning, and
Right.
just getting like a more variety of beer and wine, and having specials. And I love wine, so I was always happy to do wine tastings and find good stuff to serve.
Right. And another question that I have has to do with how did you find good people to work in the restaurant? Because that was another thing that I always acknowledged, was that there was always a really good crew of people that you worked with, and every once in a while some person would be hired and they just didn't fit in. How did you find people?
I mean, I think that people found us, you know. It was really, again, I say the universe provides. And every time that we had a position open, which was not very often because it was such an amazing place to work, and we built this like beautiful family that when people got a job there, they would stay for as long as possible.
Right.
But when there was an opening, I just followed my intuition, and I feel like I've always had a good read on people. So I hired some people right on the spot. You know, they walked in the door and I said, hey, I like you and I need a dishwasher. You start right now, you know? And other times, if it was like for a cook position or a waitress position, I would collect resumes, and I was just always looking for, you know, kind of myself. Like, I wanted good people with good work ethic who really wanted to work. And when we would interview people, it was always both Pat and I. And I would just, you know, interviewing people is so funny because they say what they think you want them to say. And so it was like trying to get a read on them without the interview questions. And yeah, I would say more often than not, I just would go by instinct, and it worked out. You know, there was a couple hires that I regretted, but that worked out.
Right.
Too.
And that was another how question, was how did you deal with that when you've hired somebody and it just wasn't working out?
Well, if it really wasn't working out, I, you know, didn't want to waste anybody's time. And so I would just, there's no easy way to say it, but just, this isn't working out. You're not working here anymore. And let them go, you know, as quickly as possible. And other times I just would sort of manifest them away. And the universe would provide. And so it wasn't, you know, so terrible where I needed to fire them on the spot. But, you know, I just knew that it wasn't an individual that was going to work there for long term, and that I didn't want them to work there long term. And usually after wishing that for, some time, then they would eventually kind of leave on their own. So I felt like the restaurant chose individuals
Right.
just as much as I did.
Yeah, because hiring people is a big deal. Firing people is a big deal. And you want to keep your crew consistent. That's the most important thing. You don't want people having people come and go. And there's so many restaurants that have people coming and going because the places are just run terrible. And you guys did a really good job. You kept up the camaraderie, which is super important, and the honesty and the work ethic was super important. And the love was super important because we were all friends. We all loved each other. And I think that was because the wildfloweR Cafe was serving love. I want to go back to what, and my question is, or who, it's a who or a what question, but who was your influences? Or what was your influences?
Well, I mean, definitely Connie, Connie was such an amazing person to work for, and she 100% believed in us and coached us and, helped us throughout the process. So, yeah, for sure. And the community in this town, it was, we weren't gonna just do something crazy or make a drastic decision or serve anything but delicious food, because we had a whole town of people that were relying on us.
Yes. And people would come from out of the area knowing about the wildfloweR Cafe.
Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting. Another question I have is having to do with when. And it has to do with making decisions. When did you decide that it was time to do something else?
So after we had owned the restaurant, so we bought it in 2005, and it was funny because we jokingly almost got married that year because both our families were coming out for our graduation, and we were buying the restaurant, and it just was like, well, why not? And I said, no, let's actually hold off on that because we're about to do this crazy thing together, and I just don't know if it's going to work. So we didn't get
the
married.
Restaurant or the marriage?
The marriage.
Yeah.
I felt great about the restaurant. So 2 years later, in 2007, we did get married because we were doing awesome as business partners and life partners. And so then we had our daughter in 2011, and I had to kind of step back a little bit. I was, before then, I was doing most of the front of the house managing and all of the baking and all of the bookkeeping. And baking is a very physical job. So when I was pregnant with Zoe, who's our daughter, I just knew I had to step away from that. So that's when I started training people to do that for me. And it's expensive. It's expensive to pay people to do quality work. And so with me sort of stepping out, I think it put a lot more pressure on Pat to work more. And I do believe that the restaurant, at least how we were running it, required 2 people to be there full time. And so after Zoe, we had another kid pretty right away, and that was Owen, and he was born in 2012. And at that point, I was really checked out. I was just sort of doing all the bookkeeping and working very part-time. And so I think it was a lot of stress for Pat. And I think, we got to the point where we felt like it wasn't fair to the restaurant if we couldn't give it our all, and life got just too full and something had to go. And obviously we had to, want to keep our kids. So we had to think about getting rid of our other baby, which was the restaurant. And, I think the real reason that we felt like it was time was because, again, we had a super willing and awesome and amazing employee who is Sue, who is the current owner, and she was just bound and determined and reminded me of myself 8 years prior. And I thought, well, let's hand the baton now and let her run with it. So
because she was there.
She was there.
And she was an employee also.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's been the thread that's been running through this storyline is children came into the picture, and children it's a great burden, responsibility, and goal to raise a good kid.
Mm-hmm.
That's the number one goal should be in anyone's life. If you're ever going to have children, make sure that they eat well and that they get enough love. And the restaurant provided that for a lot of people in town. And my last question, because we're going to sum up this interview, it's another WH word, and it rhymes with weather. And Humboldt County is known for its cloudiness, its beautiful trees, its access to nature within 20-minute walk or drive. So my last question to you is, whatever you want to say.
Well, I am grateful for this interview, Sean, because you have always been a pillar of wildfloweR, as you know, and you worked with all of us.
Yep.
In some way, shape, or form. And yeah, I wildfloweR is still my favorite restaurant. So I'm just so glad to see it thriving, and I'm so grateful to have been a part of it for 16 years of my life. And I really just hope that it continues to be so successful, and that is all.
Yeah, I believe it will be. Always be the wildfloweR Cafe at 1604 G Street in Arcata. And the number, I'll never forget, like my house number that I grew up with, 822-0360. It's embedded in my brain. And this has been Darcey Quinn, the third owner of the wildfloweR Cafe. And my next interview is going to be with Sue, who is the fourth owner of the cafe. And I thank you so much. And let's give a wave to the universe. Big wave with your hand. Yeah, big wave to the universe. And thank you so much. And let us all give thanks and praise for the wildfloweR Cafe.